Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. COVID-impacted industry strongly embraces new GDST standards, brought to you by Seafood Source and sponsored by the World Wildlife Fund. We have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we officially get started. If you have any technical questions or issues using the WebEx platform, please use the chat box and I will respond right away. If you have any issues with audio, please click on the phone icon above the chat window to receive the teleconference information. For those that do call in, to ensure call quality, everyone's lines have been muted today. If you happen to get disconnected, you can log on again using the instructions provided in your webinar confirmation email. If you continue to experience difficulty, please email webinars@seafoodsource.com and we will respond as soon as we can. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box and hit send to submit them. At the end of the presentation, we will have our presenters answer questions. This webinar will be recorded and you will receive a thank you email with the on-demand materials within 3 business days. And with all of that out of the way, I would like to welcome our speakers and hand the presentation off to the Senior Manager at WWF and GDST Co-Chair, David Shore. Welcome, David.
Hi, Laura, and thank you very much. Good day, everyone. I'm David Shore, Senior Manager for Transparent Seas at WWF, headquartered in Washington. I'm with you today in my role as co-chair of the GDST. This webinar marks the one-year anniversary of the publication of the GDST 1.0 standards. It's certainly been an intense year for all of planet Earth, including the GDST. We want to give you a sense of our progress in these past 12 months and a picture of where the GDST is heading. Like the GDST, our panel today includes a range of companies and stakeholders from around the world. 4 of them, Iberostar, Whole Foods Market, Austral Fisheries, and Sea Delight, will talk about their experiences with GDST. Carrie Brownstein of Whole Foods Market is also here to represent the 10 other companies that serve along with Whole Foods on the GDST steering committee. After those presentations, 2 of which were pre-recorded, we'll have a short video with some additional company testimonials. All in all, you'll be hearing from 18 companies during this webinar. But first, I will kick things off with some context and background, along with my colleague and co-leader of the GDST Secretariat, Brian Hitchcock from the Institute of Food Technologists. Then, Francois Monnier, an expert financial analyst with Planet Tracker, will talk about an important study looking at the economics of GDST-based traceability. We'll have a short time for Q&A at the end, and as Laura said, please use the chat box to type in your questions at any time. Most of you already know that the GDST was created in 2017 as a major business-to-business forum to draft the first ever global industry standards for seafood traceability. The GDST standards aim to support interoperability and verifiability in traceability systems to help the seafood industry overcome confusion and overcome the barriers to data exchange that exist in current traceability practices. The ultimate goal is not only to facilitate business, but to help combat illegal and irresponsible production practices, support sustainability, increase brand value, and decrease business risk. After 3 years of intensive work involving more than 5 dozen companies, the GDST 1.0 standards were formally launched on March 16th last year. You can still find the launch webinar on our website, which is a good place to get a deeper introduction to the standards and to see the high level of support they enjoyed right from the outset. Unfortunately, the launch of the GDST standards coincided with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, our launch webinar was one of the very first virtual seafood events that started just after the Boston Seafood Show was canceled. We all know that COVID has had severe impacts on businesses, communities, and families across the seafood sector and the world, even while a few seafood companies have actually experienced rising sales. At a minimum, the pandemic has thrown everyone into a state of uncertainty and risk, and for many, it has posed an existential threat. But despite the way COVID-19 has interrupted life and rearranged business plans and priorities, companies around the world have been steadily moving to adopt and implement the GDST standards. In fact, the COVID crisis has made many companies realize that traceability is more important now than ever, increasing their understanding that traceability is an essential tool for survival in the new normal of today's seafood marketplace. The GDST's momentum is visible first in the growing number of companies adopting these standards since our launch. More than 80 companies are now GDST members, with more than half of them having made public commitments to begin implementation now. Of course, compared to the industry as a whole, these numbers are not huge, but they are significant and they are growing week by week. And they include quite a few major players and influential leaders, the kind of early adopters who point to where things are really heading. We've also seen steady growth in formal endorsements and working partnerships from other major seafood industry platforms. We launched last year with strong endorsements from CBOS, Global Tuna Alliance, SALT, and the ASC and MSC. Since then, we've added important platforms like CPACT in North America, the UK Seafood Industry Alliance, ISSF, and GSSI. There's also been excellent growth in the number of traceability solution vendors lining up to sell products and services that support GDST implementation. We now have well over 24 vendors that are actively engaged. These vendors are not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk. We've just held a virtual event similar to a hackathon where head-to-head IT competitors successfully demonstrated their new ability to use GDST standards to exchange traceability data with each other in an interoperable format. Check out our website for additional details. GDST standards are also quickly emerging as a focus and reference point for other important processes. A widely reported joint statement on illegal fishing was recently issued by 5 leading seafood industry platforms, including the GDST. This unusual meta-coalition, representing more than 180 companies, called for urgent action to get illegal fish products out of world markets. And it identified just 2 major steps to do so. First, for industry to implement the GDST standards, and second, for governments to ratify and implement the Port State Measures Agreement. Similarly, the World Benchmarking Alliance has updated their 2019 methodology for their Seafood Stewardship Index. It's a robust tool to measure the sustainability performance of the 30 most influential seafood companies. Their updated methodology now includes GDST membership and implementation as benchmark elements for judging company performance on seafood traceability. Third, the FAO recently released a draft of new guidance on seafood traceability that treats GDST standards as a major reference point for its technical discussion, putting the GDST at the core of emerging intergovernmental traceability norms. By the way, the FAO has called for public comments on this draft, and we encourage all interested stakeholders to respond before the April 12th deadline. If you want more information, please contact us. In sum, all these things I have described add up to this. The GDST standards are a real thing. They are here, they are being embraced, and the momentum behind them is growing. It is time for all companies to take a solid look and to figure out how to get on board. But even if the GDST standards are an idea whose time has come, we know that for many companies, implementing GDST can be a challenge and may require a process that has to be taken step by step. That is why the GDST Secretariat has worked hard to develop tools and technical support to help companies along the way. My colleague, Brian Hitchcock of the Institute of Food Technologists, will now give you a brief overview of the kind of implementation support that we have available. Brian?
Thank you, David, for the introduction. I'd just like to take a few moments, based on my role at the Global Food Traceability Center at IFT, to give you a sense of the tools and things that we've been working on. You know, as David mentioned, there's a lot to do to be able to bring these the standard to life. And so one of our focus areas has been building a suite of tools and techniques and examples that all of you can use in your journey. And here's an example of 6 of those that we can do. And I'm not going to drain these. All this information is available on our website, but they range from things like assessments of your current state, your current supplier base, your internal ability, scorecards, and to be able to see where you are and where you should be going and track where your progress. The things like software examples to be able to capture information out in the water, to example pilot tools you can do yourself or work with us. We have case studies available, whether those be at a pilot or a live implementation. And we also have a wealth of information and a GitHub set up where you can pull information and interact with other developers. These are just examples. But I wanted to indicate to all of you that the GDST is committed to providing the resources and the support needed to support your journey in bringing these standards to life. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Francois Meunier, who's going to talk about, from Planet Tracker, who's going to talk about the financial analysis that they did.
Hi, thank you, Brian, and hello, everyone. My name is Francois Meunier, and I'm a financial analyst at Planet Tracker. We are a not-for-profit financial think tank with expertise in both finance and nature. You might have seen our work in the Financial Times, The Economist, or at platforms such as the United Nations Global Compact. So our goal really is to align investor capital with planetary limits. So we do this by analyzing what scientists and NGOs tell us about the natural world, and we convert this into a message that is digestible by the financial community, so that investors ask for greater sustainability at companies. And we also work with the industry directly, such as with CBOS, for instance, in seafood. And for instance, in the seafood industry, we identified that claims of sustainability cannot be guaranteed without traceability. And yet, seafood traceability is not widely implemented. We therefore wrote a detailed report on that topic last year called Traceable Returns. Its conclusion is that investing in traceability makes a lot of sense from a financial perspective for seafood companies, and that using Gdst standards makes a lot of sense from an operational perspective. Let me explain why. So there are 3 main obstacles on the road towards industry-wide traceability: lack of interoperability between traceability systems, poor data capture and management, and the presence of traceability gaps in the seafood supply chain. You've heard from David how Gdst standards work and therefore how they help overcome the first 2 out of these obstacles. Now there is a remaining challenge: traceability gaps in the supply chain. These gaps typically happen at mixing points, such as when seafood is processed. Addressing these gaps will require a large number of businesses to improve traceability practices in the middle of the supply chain. Let's talk about seafood processing then. Is investing in traceability worthwhile for mid-chain actors? And how does the Gdst fit in? Seafood processing, as you can see here, is a very fragmented business. We have identified more than 4,000 companies which process seafood globally. As you would expect from a fragmented industry, margins at seafood processors are low. We calculate that the average EBIT margin, so the margin before interest and tax, is 3.4% of sales in the industry. For companies wishing to tackle the low profitability of the seafood processing industry, you have several options. Volume growth, but that risks putting further pressure on fish populations. Price inflation, but that is challenging in a fiercely competitive industry. Cutting costs, but often this has social implications. How about traceability? From the analysis of the seafood processing sector that we did, we were able to paint a picture of what the average company looks like from a financial perspective. We then looked at a number of factors that really matter to seafood processors, such as product handling costs, ability to secure new markets, or limit food recalls, etc. We then estimated what would be the net benefit of implementing an integrated hardware traceability solution for the average processing company. That's the 3rd column in this table. And as you can see, the main drivers of cost savings are lower product waste, lower food recalls, and lower IT costs. Using these assumptions, we estimate that implementing a GDST compliant traceability system across a typical seafood processing organization could double its margin from 3.4 to 6.8%. So as a conclusion, the widespread implementation of a GDST compliant traceability solution offers three main benefits. Firstly, it improves margins. Secondly, it gives more credibility to sustainability claims. And thirdly, it lowers exposure to risks such as IUU fishing and food recalls. And so to refer back to what I initially said, this also means that GDST helps create the conditions necessary to overcome the third obstacle to improve traceability. It increased the likely return on investment in traceability and so helps close traceability gaps in the supply chain and therefore benefits the entire industry. So the work we do at Planet Tracker is to engage with investors and seafood companies so that traceability becomes a key topic when meeting with management and that the use of GDST standards becomes more widespread to advance sustainability in the industry. Thank you. David?
Francois, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. We will now turn to the first of our company speakers, Dr. Megan Morikawa, Global Sustainability Office Director at the major international hotel group, Iberostar. Megan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, David. And again, my name is Megan Morikawa, Global Director of Sustainability at Iberostar Group. And it's my pleasure to give you all a little bit of a perspective on how the GDST is being implemented in an international tourism context. You know, prior to the pandemic, tourism represented 10% of the world's GDP and was the second fastest growing industry. While, of course, the economic impact of the pandemic has hit tourism disproportionately hard, it's also taught us that tourism can be a major driver for sustainability and the valuation of nature in remote destinations. For us at Iberostar, we're a family-owned and operated business with third and fourth generation leadership that come from an island in Mallorca. With 80% of our over 120 hotels beachfront, the ocean for us was always a clear commitment. And with our Wave of Change movement, it's actually a commitment to 3 lines of action, which are to embody a circular economy in our operations, promote coastal health around our properties, and a commitment to the responsible consumption of seafood. We believe in being science-based in our actions and to have those actions drive everything that we do, which is why we have our 5 long-term commitments to 2030. These commitments include removing all single-use plastics from our operations, which we achieved last year, working to send no waste to landfill by 2025, reaching carbon neutrality by 2030, having increasingly healthy nature in our destinations alongside profitable tourism by 2030, and finally to source 100% of our seafood from responsible sources by 2025. It's actually a real pleasure to be speaking to this community because often when I present this goal, amongst the others, folks have a hard time understanding why responsible seafood sourcing is so challenging to achieve. Yet I'm preaching to the choir when I tell you that the complexity of our supply chain is one of the largest challenges that we face. For seafood alone, at Iberostar, our sourcing spans 37 countries, 14 FAO regions, and 128 species to deliver the 3.8 million kilos of seafood that Iberostar consumes in 19 countries every year. And so in many cases, our distributors can be 4 or 5 times removed from the producers. But clearly, in order to achieve a goal of responsible sourcing, just like Francois was indicating, and responsible for us means seafood that is benchmarked, is certified by a certification benchmarked by GSSI, rated or assessed, or in a fishery improvement program. We needed to find a way to overcome this complexity to be able to ensure we can track and ultimately value sustainable seafood, and most importantly, have that value get translated all the way down to the primary producers. Last year, we adopted the GDST 1.0 standard because we saw it as a major step to standardize traceability processes and facilitate interoperability across partners in our supply chain, providing us a framework of what data needs to be collected at every step of the supply chain. We're really still very early in this journey. In fact, we just launched our ambition to source 100% of our seafood from responsible sources right before the pandemic hit last year. And as part of that pathway, we set annual milestones with the ambitious heavy lift of sourcing 45% of our seafood from responsible sources in year one. Year one also happened to be 2020, when the pandemic forced 100% of business closure for part of the year and massive supply chain disruption across the globe. But fortunately, in this challenge, we saw an opportunity to make sustainability a major part of our recovery. This came from the top. Our C-suite was directly involved in ensuring responsible seafood goals were not only not stopped, but accelerated. Yet this ambition needed to be met with floods of new data that we did not already have on our seafood products. With KDEs from the GDST, our purchasing teams demonstrated the strength of Iberostar's relationships with our providers, leveraging contracts to pursue information. But meanwhile, our operations team prioritized the reimagination of our seafood menus with the same level of importance as adjusting our entire buffet experiences to respond to health measures from the COVID pandemic. And then most of all, our responsible seafood strategy director demonstrated her immense knowledge of the industry and ability to practically problem solve in times of crisis. Thus, in 2020, I'm proud to say that we were actually able to source 41.1% of our seafood from responsible sources. However, getting the remaining 60% will require an interoperability that we believe GDST will help facilitate for better data collection, greater agility, and a better understanding of responsibility across the supply chain. There's certainly a long journey ahead, not only for us at Iberostar, but for the ambitious goals of GDST and of course the seafood industry broadly. However, standards like these allow for these watershed opportunities, which we need for ambitious targets such as the one that we're setting at Iberostar, and that in turn, we hope our sector will broadly adopt. At Iberostar, we commit to getting more and more tourism actors involved in the dialogue to determine the value of, to demonstrate the value of sustainable seafood to more and more customers. Thus, I hope you leave inspired by the progress GDST has made in a year and by the other incredible stories and successes presented by other panelists, each of which that I believe demonstrate we have the tools and inspiration for an inflection point in a sustainable recovery. Thank you. David, back to you.
Thanks very much, Megan. Really excellent to hear of Iberostar's work, especially given the amazing complexity of your supply chain and the range of species you cover. We're now going to turn to the distinguished member of our GDST steering committee, Carrie Brownstein of Whole Foods Market. Carrie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, David. And that was a great presentation. I'll have to check out Iberostar when I can travel again. That was really impressive hearing about those commitments. Hello, everyone. My name is Carrie Brownstein, and I am responsible for seafood quality standards for Whole Foods Market. And I'm here today mostly to speak on behalf of the GDST steering committee, of which Whole Foods Market is an active member. Before I do that, I'd like to say a couple words about Whole Foods Market and at least one of our seafood products where the GDST is already making a difference. Whole Foods Market is a world leader in natural and organic foods. We have over 500 stores in North America and the UK. In our seafood program, we are known for our commitment to sustainability. All of our wild-caught seafood is MSC certified or rated green or yellow by Seafood Watch. And all of our canned tuna is pole and line or troll caught. Our farm seafood standards set a high bar for aquaculture today, and traceability is really a fundamental part of our commitment to responsible sourcing and to ensuring that we're sourcing from suppliers who meet our standards. In a few moments, you'll hear from David Carter, who's CEO of Austral Fisheries, which is a leading fishing company based in Australia. You'll hear about how Austral Fisheries exports MSC certified toothfish to customers around the world, ultimately including to Whole Foods Market stores. By implementing the GDST standards, Austral Fisheries provides a real-world illustration of the GDST in action. It's only been a year since the GDST standards were launched, and yet we're already seeing these important traceability standards applied from the vessel right through to retail. At Whole Foods Market, we're looking forward to seeing more and more of our suppliers opting for GDST-based traceability. Furthermore, Whole Foods Market is definitely not alone in advancing the GDST. The GDST steering committee represents the diversity of the global seafood industry. We include well-known and respected supermarkets and wholesalers, such as Metro in the EU, Sainsbury's in the UK, and of course Whole Foods Market in the US. We represent fishers and fish farmers through the participation of the Indonesian Poland Line and Handline Fisheries Association and the Vietnam Association of Seafood Exporters and Producers. We also include boutique entrepreneurs like Culinary Collaborations, which is one of the leading distributors of sushi products across the United States. With the participation of Thai Union based in Bangkok, our steering committee has one of the largest vertically integrated seafood companies in the world, involved in processing, branding, and distribution at a global scale. Similarly, Labouré Fine Foods, based in France, owns major brands with a strong market presence in over 60 countries. And of course, our committee includes several leading representatives of the medium-sized, mid-supply chain companies that are the vital backbone of the seafood industry, including the Fish and Company and Orca Bay Foods in the US, as well as New England Seafood International, based in the UK. I know that I speak for the entire steering committee in celebrating the one-year anniversary of the GDST 1.0 standards. The past year has been unusual and intense for all of us. The COVID-19 pandemic overtook our daily lives just as the GDST standards were being launched last March, devastating so many families, communities, and economies across the globe. This disruption has had profound impacts on the seafood industry. Yet it's a real tribute to the strength and the value of the GDST that in the middle of all this very difficult time, so many companies like those whose logos you see here on this slide are showing strong interest in adopting and implementing the GDST standards. The reason for this is clear, which is that the GDST standards make good business sense for our industry, making us more adaptable for what lies ahead, while also reflecting our commitment to sustainability and responsible sourcing. For the dozens of companies out there that are already committed to GDST, we really say congratulations for your forward thinking and forward-looking action. For the rest of our colleagues across this whole industry, we welcome you to join us as we use interoperable seafood traceability to make our industry stronger. So adopt the GDST 1.0 standards today. Thank you, and back to you, David.
Thanks so much, Carrie, for that great presentation, both on behalf of Whole Foods Market, your supply base, as well as the steering committee. Next, it would have been a real pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker in person, David Carter, the CEO of Austral Fisheries, but he is on the other side of the globe, where the hour is a bit late for webinars. For David and for the following speaker, we have pre-recorded audio for their presentations. So you'll shortly hear David's voice, and I'll be running his slides for him.
Austral Fisheries is one of Australia's largest integrated commercial fishing companies based in Perth, Western Australia. We operate a mid-sized fleet of trawlers, deep-sea long-range freezer fishing vessels, and a smaller craft fishing in Australian waters and on the high seas. We fish for prawn in the Australian Northern Prawn Fishery, where I started as a deckhand 43 years ago, as well as for a range of snapper species. Austral operates as a joint venture with Japanese seafood company Maruha Nichiro, and we have an annual revenue in the order of $100 million. We own some of Australia's leading seafood brands, including our luxury Glacier 51 brand for Patagonian toothfish and Skull Island brand for giant tiger prawns. And we sell our fish all over the world with distribution into China, Hong Kong, Singapore, UAE, the US and EU. We're proud to have our products featured in Whole Foods markets as just one of many outstanding retailers carrying our products worldwide. Austral Fisheries has a proud history of leadership on seafood sustainability, being the first commercial supporters in the world of the MSC standard before it was launched over 22 years ago. We're active in working to eliminate illegal fishing in our waters around Heard Island and beyond, including through our collaborations with NGOs such as Sea Shepherd. We're also ambitious for climate action and battle marine ocean plastics. In fact, in 2016, Austral became the first, and as far as I know, is still the only fishing company in the world to be certified carbon neutral. For Austral Fisheries, sustainability is fundamental to our mission and to our brand. Traceability is an essential part of that commitment, and GDST is a key part of our traceability plan. Traceability means our business partners downstream can know what they are buying, and consumers can trust our fish and know the story behind our brands. In 2018, as part of what we are doing to educate and inform consumers, we worked with WWF Australia to help develop a blockchain-based traceability tool that has come to be known as OpenSC. Now we are on track to have our entire toothfish and prawn product lines record their history from time and place of capture right through to the consumer. We'll give our customers accurate and authentic details of the journey their seafood takes, and in so doing, build trust and loyalty and hopefully premium. So where does the GDST fit in? It's going to help us in several ways. For one thing, as early adopters of new technologies, we at Austral know that being a pioneer can have some risks. Today, there are lots of new technologies and services promising to deliver transparency and traceability, and it's hard to know which ones will really succeed in the marketplace. We're making a significant investment in OpenSC and in the associated RFID readers and tags and software. We can't be certain that the future will bring, but since both our company and OpenSC are adopting the GDST standard, we know that the approach we are taking will be compatible with other systems in the marketplace for years to come, no matter which specific technology ultimately prevails. As a standard, GDST is therefore our insurance policy, our way of future-proofing our investment. And for this reason, we view this work as being super important and valuable. Additionally, GDST will help us grow and maintain our customer base. We've opted to work with OpenSC to create a direct-to-consumer avenue to tell our story. But we know that our downstream business partners, traders, distributors, retailers, and food service companies may have different needs for their own traceability systems. By adopting the GDST standards, we are combining our investment in blockchain with an approach that guarantees interoperability, meaning our system will be able to share data with any other GDST compliant system. This will grow our ability to deliver the information and traceability demanded by our business partners, whether or not they are adopting the blockchain solution. All in all, we see GDST as an important part of our sustainability and marketing plans. That's why we've adopted the standards and are working to implement them now. Thank you for your time and attention.
I'd like to thank David in absentia, and we will thank him in person as soon as he wakes up. That was a great presentation. Our last panelist will be Stephen Fisher, a veteran of the GDST process, who is Sustainability Director at Sea Delight. At our launch webinar a year ago, Steve described the ambitions Sea Delight then had to use GDST to advance traceability, including in Vietnam. Today, his pre-recorded presentation will give you a very positive update.
Hello, I'm Stephen Fisher, Sustainability Director for Sea Delight. I'd like to thank GDST and WWF for inviting me to give a presentation today. Since the beginning of the global dialogue on seafood traceability, Sea Delight has been a GDST member and a supporter of interoperable traceability systems for the seafood industry. Sea Delight has also actively joined the work of developing the GDST 1.0 standard for use in real-world solutions for seafood traceability requirements. Today, I'll talk about implementing GDST 1.0 in the Vietnam handline tuna fishery. This fishery is based in the ports and fishing communities of South Central Vietnam. The vessels used are handmade wooden boats usually owned and operated by local families. The fishery uses handline gear and primarily targets yellowfin tuna, big-eye tuna, and swordfish. These products are imported and distributed in the North American and European market. Last year, we purchased more than 2 million pounds of tuna from the Vietnam handline fishery. Because of the seasonal fluctuations in tuna catch, local processors also import frozen tuna and swordfish raw material from high seas fisheries. Although robust traceability data was already being collected for EU catch certificates and NOAA SIMP requirements, the administrators and key stakeholders in the Vietnam tuna FIP realized the need for a paper-based FIP-specific trace code system to be sure only locally caught fish were being marketed as sourced from the FIP. As the use of the paper-based trace code expanded within the FIP, we concluded that it was time to begin thinking about a digital solution to collecting catch and traceability data. Inspired by GDST, WWF Vietnam, Vina Tuna, and Sea Delight began by designing a simple photo app for collecting bycatch data at sea. The Vina Tuna tech team built the app and we began testing it and sharing our experiences with GDST. The lessons learned from the actual at-sea use of the photo app led to collaboration with GDST and WWF on designing and testing an electronic app for the FIP trace system, followed by an e-logbook app, which replaces the cumbersome paper logbooks being used by fishers now. Both the traceability app and the e-logbook app share many features with the original photo app, such as the capability to automatically record the GPS location, date, and time with each data entry, and to support data with in-app photos. Both apps fully comply with GDST 1.0 standards. The new e-logbook app is based on the Vietnam National Onboard Logbook for all wild fisheries. These apps have been presented in meetings with national fisheries authorities, and they've approved further development of the program. With the ongoing support of the GDST technical team, we now have local processors using the Trace app, and the e-logbook is being used at sea in the fishery. The progress made so far was accomplished in a year when COVID-19 changed the way we all communicate and work. All international meetings were held online. Although Vietnam is recognized as one of the most successful countries worldwide in fighting the pandemic, periodic local outbreaks and lockdowns disrupted in-person meetings and local travel. We all had to learn how to adapt and keep working. The next step is to link the e-logbook used by fishers and the government and the Trace app used by the processors and exporters. This will allow us the option to provide customers with complete catch-to-plate information on the seafood they're buying. We're also exploring how to link the traceability app's upstream data sets to the existing customer data requirements and traceability systems such as GS1. As we continue to work with the support of GDST and WWF US, Vina Tuna, WWF Vietnam, and key FIP stakeholders, we will test and implement these systems with the goal of sharing them with the seafood industry worldwide. We will also regularly report progress through our website and social media. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve, for showing us GDST as it is already changing.
Hello, I'm Stephen Fisher, Sustainability Director for Sea Delight.
We're all doing so well.
I'd like.
Okay, one technical glitch, you'll forgive me. Our final presentation today is just a very short video to help give you a sense of the reality of GDST in other places and businesses across the globe. So you'll bear with me for 1 second while we make this transition and watch this video.
Hi, my name is Sridhar Jagannathan. I'm the Quality Assurance and Compliance Manager with Mount Cook Alpine Salmon Limited in New Zealand.
Hello, my name is Wook. Assistant Manager of the company.
Ángel Matamoros, CSR Chief Officer de la Pescanoa, Vigo, Spain.
Casey Marion, Director of Sustainability Initiatives and Quality Management Systems, Beaver Street Fisheries, located in Jacksonville, Florida.
Over the past decade, traceability issue with seafood products has been a hot topic. That's why we have placed faith in GDST 1 standard to serve its purpose. And so we have already adopted GDST 1 standard as soon as it was released last year.
With GDST, we can link our system with many different customers. The GDST standard will also help our business system connect easily with the government digital cut document.
Becoming a GDST member and adopting the GDST 1.0 standard is important to Grupo Nueva Pescanova because it helps us demonstrate our commitment to sustainability while assuring the safety and quality of our seafood product markets.
GDST provides value to the seafood industry because it provides a universal common language for our industry to source seafood responsibly.
So we believe you too will join us in adopting GDST 1 standard and supporting for mutually beneficial betterment of our industry.
Okay, that concludes the presentations from our excellent panel and our other friends around the world. I think what you've heard from all of them reinforces the fundamental message that I stated earlier. The GDST standards are happening. The future of seafood traceability is now. We hope you will check it out and get on board. With that, we are ready to turn to the questions and answers, and I turn the floor back over to Laura.
Excellent. Thank you, David. We are now moving into our Q&A session. As a reminder, if you have not already done so, to ask your questions, please type them into the chat box and hit send to submit them. And our first question today is, how are you seeing the relationship between the implementation of GDST and government policy and regulation?
Thanks, Laura. Government policy, GDST and government policy and regulation. So I think I'll turn to one of our panelists, Carrie Brownstein, in a moment to talk about that since she's on our steering committee. But let me just say that one of the things we've noticed since almost the first day that GDST was released was the interest of both stakeholders in the industry, stakeholders in the NGO sector, and even governments in the potential relevance of GDST to emerging regulations. So GDST was designed in part to support compliance, including some compliance with SIMP, as Steve Fisher mentioned, as well as compliance with the EU IUU regulation. I think there's a real question now as Japan looks like it'll become the third major market to impose border controls against the imports of illegal fish, whether GDST will play a role there as well. I would note that GDST recently submitted comments to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration regarding Section 204. Many of you may be aware the United States right now is going through a major regulatory revision of its food traceability, not just seafood traceability. And the approach that they have put on the table as their proposed regulation is an approach that tracks very nicely with GDST. In fact, the GDST steering committee and membership issued supportive comments to the regulation, in part recognizing that the implementation of GDST would be a good step to prepare companies for compliance with the emerging regulations. But Carrie, why don't I turn to you, since you're on the steering committee, if you have any other thoughts on this question?
Yeah, sure. Well, the GDST standards and process are valuable because they'll help with regulatory compliance. So the standards themselves were drafted with the requirements of SIMP in mind. So the KDEs of the GDST, the key data elements, cover the requirements of SIMP, the Seafood Import Monitoring Program. David mentioned the FDA traceability proposed rule for food safety. I mean, again, these regs are not finalized yet. So, we have to see what the final rule looks like. but the GDST will line up well with these new regs, assuming that the final version looks similar to the draft version. So essentially, companies that implement the GDST will have a much easier time with compliance with these traceability regs.
Excellent, thank you. And another question here, for Planet Tracker, how can a company calculate their likely returns from GDST implementation?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think what you want to do is process by steps, I think. So the first step would be to know where you're at. So are you already using any form of traceability? Because that will obviously drive the following steps. For instance, are you using a in-house developed solution, or are you already more advanced, or do you have maybe no traceability solution at all? And then the second step would be know where you want to go. Would you like to move to an integrated hardware solution, so with barcode scanners, RFID tags, like we heard from Austral Fisheries? Do you want to cover your entire supply chain or just a specific product? So that's also something important that will drive the answer and will help you find out really what specific products is the most adapted to you. There are many traceability providers around and many that endorse GDST standards. And now that you know what you want, what you get, the third step is to compute the cost of implementing that solution. So the big one would be upfront investment of the activation fee of the software, cost of any hardware such as servers and scanners, as we heard before, annual license fees, on-site implementation, etc. And also for GDST compliant solutions specifically, you also need to factor in the cost of getting your team up to speed with these standards if they're not already, and compare them with the cost of status quo, which are likely to be higher because normally there's a lack of interoperability. And then lastly, the fourth step really is about computing the benefits. So the key questions here to answer would be what will be the savings in product handling costs, savings in data processing and reporting costs, saving in compliance costs, as we just heard from Kerry, decrease in food recall costs, decrease in waste, decrease in liability and insurance costs, etc. So yeah, that's it. Now you can compute the net benefits in terms of margin and therefore the return on investment. If you're interested, we're in the process of writing a new report based on actual case studies, so I can soon share more information.
Sure, this is Brian. I think I can also add on to that as well. You know, Francois has and his team did an excellent report, and they're providing some case studies on that, and they're doing some additional work. On the GDST side, we also have some resources available. I didn't show them on the slide that I had as well, but if you'd like some additional information there, we have some calculations and example literature-based studies as well if you're looking for some more information.
Thanks, Brian. I'd like to just jump in also. In addition to the tools that we have for really looking at quantification issues and technical issues, one of the things that Francois pointed out as among the first steps is to take a careful look at how you're going to phase implementation. Where you're going to go first, you're going to go for your whole supply chain first. What are going to be the types of implementations you're going to do? So we understand that for particularly for companies with multiple product lines either coming in or going out or both, implementation may be something that you do in a segmented way. So among the other tools that we have available are tools for basically drawing a roadmap for analyzing your company current status of your traceability systems. And then also, and this is something that the GDST Secretariat can be available to help with if it's appropriate for you, reaching out to your supply chain and really understanding what are the conditions of your suppliers as well as your customers in terms of their readiness for adopting GDST. So as you do a kind of landscape survey of your own internal systems and the systems of your supply chain partners, you can begin to decide which of the areas of my business are going to be the easiest, the low-hanging fruit for me to take on first. Am I going to take on just one product line, one set of SKUs? Am I going to take on a whole species group? But by drawing a step-by-step roadmap, you can not only enable the kind of financial analysis that Francois was talking about, but you can also kind of make a plan, and it might even be a multi-year plan for how you're going to engage the partners you need to engage to get it done. Think about also how you may or may not decide to outsource parts of your IT system. So all of these questions are the nuts and bolts questions that the companies we are dealing with are facing on a day-to-day basis. And we have been seriously dedicated to listening to companies and to helping develop tools and pathways that allow companies to think about implementing the GDST standards without having to swallow them whole all at once. So thanks.
Thank you. And another question here, what are the obstacles companies are facing trying to implement?
That is an excellent question also. I don't know who on the panel might want to take that up a little bit. Certainly Megan and Carrie, we know that you guys described your state of play. And Megan, you were very candid about saying how early you are in the process and showing your enormous supply chain. I'll just say that from the perspective of the Secretariat, we're doing, talking with companies every single day. And I just like to let people know the current Secretariat of the GDST, which is staffed by WWF and IFT for the moment, although I think in the years ahead that will move out of our NGOs into the GDST as a new entity itself. But we have staff that are located in the region. So we've got a regional staff for the Americas. We've got regional staff for Asia and Pacific, and we've got regional staff for Europe as well as Africa region, who are on a day-to-day basis talking to companies about what they're facing. And I think what we're finding is that there are a number of obstacles. The first obstacle really is just to get your head around what this thing is. When companies go and look at the GDST standards, they can look on paper like they're very complicated. You can go on our website. You can download the standards themselves, which are these highly technical materials. You can also download explanatory documents, some of which are written for technical professionals and some of which are written for people inside companies that are not technical professionals to really explain what's going on. But for very often, the first obstacle for a company is just to get their head around what this thing really is, to understand them. And we've got a lot of resources on our website, and we're willing to talk to people. Then there's a question of really doing the mapping that I was talking about before. And we find that there are different types of obstacles. Sometimes the obstacles look like IT obstacles, where just, you look at your system and you think, oh, we're still heavily paper-based over here. That's going to take some significant work. Or maybe we have very different levels of sophistication in our supply chain, or even inside our own company. So there could be IT obstacles. But actually, it's turning out, I think, in general, not for everybody, but in general, the actual technical IT obstacles are not the major problem. There may be some system procurement challenges. There may be deciding which vendor you want to work with, but the technology is not really the rate limiting factor. Understanding your supply chain and your customer base and how you're going to use this and with whom you're going to use this, how to fit all those decision-making into your overall business strategy beyond traceability. Those are the kinds of business decisions that can pose some obstacles. And that's why our roadmap approach is there to help. But I don't know, Megan or Carrie, would you like to comment a little bit on how you and your internal conversations, what are the kinds of obstacles you're facing? What are the kinds of things you're doing to try to overcome them?
I'd be happy to speak to some of those points. I think for us, we see our seafood, and this is, of course, a vast oversimplification in sort of two categories, right? Your top 10 most common species that are often internationally imported, that have many options of sustainable sourcing or certifications, and that are really buying into a lot of this process, that have the capacity and ability and scale to really buy into many of these IT solutions. Granted, there's, of course, a bottleneck as well for us within the company. But then on the other side, there's that, and that top 10 species for us at Iberostar makes up about half of our volume. annually. But the other half of that volume are often the regional products that are really representing the local heritage and gastronomic heritage in our destinations. That's also really important for us to engage with and find ways for them to, move from thinking about improvement to also thinking about what they need to be doing across the supply chain. While the supply chains might be less complex when it's a more regional sort of product, I think this is a really big challenge for us because it's so many species, so many destinations, so many different challenges that we face, and this ability to be able to collect and create data at the very beginning stage is just one of many challenges that I think a lot of these fisheries face. So I think that for us is one of the biggest challenges, is this sort of dealing with two worlds of seafood, the most common species, but then also the ones that are regional and represent local cultural heritage.
Thanks, Megan. I think, Laura, in the interest of time, maybe we should move on and again, just encourage people to visit our website to check out some of the tools we have to help answer these questions.
Yes, excellent. I believe we have time for one more question today. Let's see. Somebody is asking, how are IT service providers responding to GDST?
Maybe I'll ask Brian to jump in on this in a moment, but let me say that this is one of the areas that we're actually most excited. From the beginning, there were quite a number of IT providers who saw this as an opportunity. And look, I think just to speak really bluntly about this, in the world of the IT providers and vendors who are selling traceability services, and please remember that the vast majority of companies outsource at least some, if not all, of their response to traceability. Only some companies really handle it entirely inside. We saw before GDST that there were some companies in the vendor business whose business model was really to try to capture the market for themselves. They would set up systems that would say, if you want to work with me, you have to get your whole supply chain to work with me also. And if you want to do traceability, we bring your entire supply chain into my business world. That was a kind of anti-interoperable business model for capturing parts of the market. We also dealt with a lot of companies who were afraid of how they wanted to know, how do I avoid what we call vendor capture, of winding up investing too heavily in one particular solution with a vendor and then not being able to change vendors if they felt like they wanted to. What's been really remarkable about how the vendor community has responded is how many of them have recognized that this effort to capture a piece of the market by having an exclusive technology is not the future. That the future is interoperability. And while it might be true that your customers could more easily change vendors by being interoperable, what was really going to happen was we were going to grow the market for these services enormously. So they're going to have a much bigger pie to try to get a slice from. And the evidence for that is that we've had steady growth in the number of IT vendors who are willing to go online in public and sign our little thing saying, we will develop product for GDST compliance. And this thing that was like a hackathon that we just held a couple of weeks ago was a really brilliant demonstration where we had competitors coming together. And what they were trying to test was actually how competitive IT vendors could share data among themselves using GDST. That is a sign that they understand interoperability is a way of the future when they are beginning to design their systems actually to work with their competitors' systems. So Brian, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but we're very encouraged by what this looks like.
Yeah, dude, I think you covered it very, very well. The ad I was going to make, there's a high level of engagement, and the solution provider community loves that there's a standard that they can operate against. You know, operating in an ambiguous type of world where there isn't a guidepost or things that they can reference back to. So, you know, what we've provided is, you know, again, something that they can leverage and then communicate against with each other. They've really embraced the opportunity to work with us as well as each other to develop their systems. They've been happening over time, and they're active today behind the scenes. And you know, it's a very powerful way for us to scale this up. Is the solution providers then have this built into their systems, they can work with their customers to gather the information and incorporate it and share it up and down the supply chain. So yeah, we're super excited about the level of engagement from the technical community.
That's it, Laura. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And that is just about all the time that we have for today's program. I just have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we officially close out. If you could please fill out the short evaluation form that will appear once you close out of the webinar, and this will help us better serve your needs in future webinars. As a reminder, the on-demand materials will be emailed to everyone within 3 business days, and this will include a PDF of the slides as well as the link to the recording of today's presentation. And thank you again to all of our speakers for a great presentation today, and thank you to all of our attendees for taking the time out of your busy days to join us. This webinar was brought to you by Seafood Source and sponsored by the World Wildlife Fund. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to the amazing panel. Good day, everybody.
Goodbye.